It's all over for EVs. Ford and GM got shocked after a massive EV disaster that could lead them into closing their doors. They are stopping EV production, firing thousands of workers, and literally begging the political leaders to stop the EV push. The biggest auto disaster of the century is upon us, and Ford and GM are in big trouble. Why are car makers losing money on EVs? Could GM be closing its doors? The EV market is crashing as we speak, but the real reason behind this is definitely not what you think. 4 years ago, when EVs first took over the market, everyone wanted to try one. But the only thing that kept everyone from buying an EV was their astronomical price. EVs were priced at a $20,000 premium compared to gas cars, and everyone thought maybe the prices would come down in a couple of years. And yet, here we are in 2024. EV prices are still sky high, and now the government is even forcing the common man to buy EVs. But something has just happened which shook all the brands and could very well change the course of the entire EV industry. Ford and GM, two of the biggest car makers, are failing to sell EVs. Not one, not two, but a record-breaking 90,000 EVs are lying unsold in dealer lots. Dealers are loaded with EVs, but nobody wants to go near them even with a 10-foot pole. Why? Because most see EVs as a big scam, meant to oppress the common folk and take away our ability to choose. Now you might be thinking, weren't EV sales growing last year? Well, yes, but those figures were being compared to the already dismal numbers from a year ago. And this year, thousands of EV owners are rushing to get their EVs exchanged for gas cars instead. Before I tell you why GM is on the verge of literally shutting down forever, let's zero in on why Ford has been selling electric cars at a massive loss of $36,000 per car sold. The government first told car makers that if they didn't sell a certain number of EVs within the next 5 years, they'd be hit with massive fines. Now, from the outside, this might seem like they cared about the environment, but it was a shady move. Let me explain. You see, unlike Tesla, which has always been making EVs, companies like Ford and GM needed a lot more investment into new parts, factories, and tech to sell EVs. And just to avoid paying fines, they would have to take a loan from the government to invest in EVs. So whether they sell EVs or not, it's a win-win for the Biden administration. Ford's CEO Jim Farley fell into this trap and took a $9 billion loan, but now his EV ship is sinking. Things are so bad that he even had to halt production of their best-selling EV pickup, the F-150 Lightning. And despite discounting their Mustang Mach-E by $10,000, they still haven't even sold 20% of their inventory. Ford told suppliers that they'll be making about 4,000 Lightning trucks in December, but now they reduced that goal by half. Last year, Ford only sold 24,000 Lightning trucks compared to 750,000 gas F-150s they sold in the same year. And you'd think that due to poor sales, Jim Farley would come to his senses. But no, he did not. Ford kept making EVs mindlessly because the EPA set stricter emissions guidelines, which is basically the government's way of sabotaging gas car sales. Former President Donald Trump even saw this and said something so snarky that it shook Biden, but more on this in a minute. So towards the end of the year, Ford was under a $4 billion loss on top of the $9 billion they already borrowed. The only thing that could save them was their gas car sales. People are still buying gas cars like crazy, and this was Jim Farley's last chance to save his company. But there's a huge twist that nobody could have seen coming. You see, in their attempt to make more EVs, Ford lost touch with what they do best: make reliable pickups. As a result, for the third year in a row, they've topped the charts for the most US recalls. I mean, that's a hat trick nobody wants, right? But here's the silver lining. This year, 30% fewer Ford customers were affected by these safety-related recalls compared to 2022. Still, it's not the kind of news that makes you jump for joy if you're a Ford fan. Now on to the juicy part. Ford's recalling over 130,000 vehicles due to a pretty serious issue. The heart of the problem? An oil pump drive belt or drive belt tensioner that might just give up on you. If that happens, you could lose engine oil pressure. And let me tell you, losing oil pressure is no small deal. It's like the lifeblood of your car suddenly drying up. This could lead to an engine stall and even scarier, a loss of power braking assist. Imagine cruising down the highway and your car decides to take a nap. Not the kind of thrill ride anyone signs up for, right? So how big is this recall? Well, a whopping 139,730 units might be affected. If you think this is bad, let me tell you about General Motors, because this company is literally on the brink of being wiped out. And the only reason behind this is their CEO, Mary Barra. First, the lady said she wanted GM to become a luxury car maker, and that making EVs under $30,000 is a tough task, shooing away all prospective buyers. Then, when all other brands like Toyota, Honda, and Tesla were lowering car prices, she refused to offer any deals. GM even had a huge feud with the United Auto Workers Union because they refused to pay fair wages to their people. They lost over $750 million due to this strike alone. Just like Ford, GM is also losing money on EVs and having a number of issues with their cars. So what's going wrong? Well, where do I even start? First up, those self-driving cars GM's been hyping up, yeah, that's not been going so smoothly. Their robo-taxi unit Cruise just got a major timeout from California because of safety worries. GM's electric dream isn't exactly charging ahead as planned. They've had to tap the brakes on their goal of pumping out 400,000 EVs by mid-2024. Why is this? Well, it turns out folks aren't lining up for these electric rides as much as GM hoped. Plus, making these high-tech wheels is turning out to be tougher and pricier than they thought. And just when you thought it couldn't get any messier, GM and Honda decided to call it quits on their big plan to make a bunch of affordable EVs together. The Japanese think that EVs aren't the only good option and consumers should have more choices instead. Now, let's talk about software. GM's got this shiny new software team led by a hotshot from Apple, but even they're hitting the pause button to rethink their whole subscription service strategy. That means the most awaited EVs, like the family-friendly Chevy Equinox and those badass Silverado and GMC Sierra pickups, are getting delayed. They're also recalling over 323,000 of their heavy-duty pickup trucks. We're talking the big boys, Chevy Silverado, the GMC Sierra 2500 and 3500 models from 2020 through 2024. So picture this, you're chilling, your truck's parked, and out of nowhere, the tailgate just flips open. Other owners have been complaining about issues like panel gaps, brake failures, and poor part quality. With all these losses compiled, if Mary Barra doesn't do something to fix these really soon, GM could literally end forever. But what can be done? People aren't buying EVs and gas cars seem to be the only way forward. Well, this is where Trump is going to help. Trump's basically saying, elect me and I'll save us from all the EV madness. He's painting himself as the savior of the American auto industry, ready to rescue it from Biden's big EV push. And man, he's not just tapping the brakes on EVs, he's slamming them hard. What's Trump's take on all this? Well, EVs are a middle-class nightmare, and it's time to roll back to the rumble of gas engines. So why is he so revved up, you ask? Well, Trump's got a bone to pick with the whole EV scene, calling out makers for sky-high prices and for being too cozy with China. And he's got a point. A lot of the goods for EVs, especially those battery minerals, are coming from China, and that's got Trump all riled up about the US losing its edge. But here's where it gets even juicier. Trump rolled into Michigan, the heartland of US car manufacturing, and dropped a bombshell, saying Biden's EV push is more of a bust, especially for American jobs. And he's not just talking small fries. He's suggesting that over half the auto jobs in the US could vanish into thin air. That's a big deal, especially for states like Michigan where cars are king. Now, let's not just cruise on Trump's words alone. There's some serious stuff going down in the EV world that's causing some major static. Like this one guy, Scott, who dinged his Rivian and got slapped with a jaw-dropping $22,000 repair bill. 2 months and a small fortune later, he got his ride back. That's pretty nuts, right? And then there's this other dude in California whose EV range nosedived by 30% in just 5 minutes because of the cold. Talk about being left out in the cold, literally. And if that's not enough to get your engine roaring, get this. A study by S&P Global found that more than half of EV owners are thinking of switching back to gas or diesel. EVs, despite their green cards, come with a hefty price tag. We're talking over $58,000 on average. And even with tax credits trying to sweeten the deal, there's a long road ahead to make EVs the new normal. Now, amidst all this chaos, both Ford and GM are facing a common dilemma. Despite ambitious targets and hefty investments in EVs, the demand just isn't there. People are trading in their EVs for gas cars, and the once buzzing excitement around electric trucks like the F-150 Lightning is fizzling out. So naturally, they're going back to gas cars, doing what seems to be the last way to save their companies. Ford's GM Jim Farley basically said, "Hold up, we're not ditching gas and hybrid vehicles for EVs." During their third quarter earnings call, he laid it out pretty clear. Ford's not about to swap out every gas guzzler for an electric model. That's just not their style. Instead, they're sticking with what they know, like their affordable Maverick trucks and the Ranger and Everest that have a solid fan base internationally. Farley's point? Not every vehicle's ready to go electric, especially not the big boys like the F-150s or Super Duty Pro. But here's where it gets spicy. Ford was planning to drop a cool $12 billion into their EV game, including a fancy battery plant in Kentucky. Then bam, they hit the pause button. Now flip the script to GM, and they're singing a similar tune. Amidst all the EV hype, they're not ready to kiss goodbye to gas engines just yet. They've got plans to ramp up production and profits with their gas-powered lineup, proving there's still life in the old dog yet. Jim Farley's pretty stoked about Ford Blue, the division all about those gas and hybrid models. He's convinced there's untapped potential there, especially with their iconic rides like the Bronco, which is all about off-road adventures where you'd be hard-pressed to find an EV charger in sight. Ford Blue's boss, Kumar Gahaltra, is on the same wavelength. He's talking about cranking up production and aiming for juicy profits by 2026. The stark reality is that transitioning to EVs is turning out to be a mammoth task for these automotive behemoths. With EV sales taking a nosedive and ICE vehicles still reigning supreme, it's a tough balancing act between embracing the future and holding on to the past. From hefty losses and production woes to consumer skepticism and political pressures, it's a reminder that the shift to EVs is more than just a technological leap. It's a complex dance of economics, consumer behavior, and strategic foresight. And as for us, the consumers, well, it's a wake-up call to look beyond the hype and consider the practicalities and realities of EV ownership. What do you think? Have we been lied to about EVs? Is it all just a scam? Yes or no?